What's up, everyone? I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11, taking a look at tight ends for FanDuel this week, week 8. We're about halfway through the season. Cash game tight ends, pretty simple this week for me. I like Jimmy Graham at 6,700. Regardless of the revenge game going up against the Saints, this guy's been targeted 9, 8, 9, 10 times over the last 4. Has 5+ receptions in all of them, including a tough matchup against Arizona where his production kind of fell, which I think we expected a little bit of. But certainly a rebound game here. Saints have a 15.7% DVOA against tight ends this season. They rank 25th per Football Outsiders. Pretty nice price tag, especially if you're comparing them to Gronk. There's not a lot of mid-range options this week. There's no real Delaney Walker. Can't really trust Travis Kelce, who we'll get to in a minute. Outside of that, though, we don't have a ton in the mid-range. But obviously, this is a go-to weapon for Graham. They're using him basically why they traded for him at this point. It's good to see him recover from that injury. Has had a couple double-digit FanDuel performances over the last few weeks, obviously not last week. So I'm looking to use him again. Obviously, you look at that total, you look at that game, it's always pretty productive when you go to New Orleans for passing attacks. So go ahead and fire him up. Jack Doyle, 4,900. The price only came up 400 this week. I'm not in love with the matchup. He's not a must-play for me. But in terms of ownership, I still think the volume is going to be decent. Andrew Luck does use his tight ends quite often, so when there's just one of them, there is a decent amount of targets to be had. Kansas City ranks 16th against tight ends, but you know what? They really haven't really allowed a ton of production. You go back to the beginning of 2015, they've only allowed 3 receiving touchdowns to tight ends. So I'm not going to say he's a must-play, but if you're looking to kind of pay up at the running back spot, if you're looking to get Julio Jones and pay up at quarterback or do whatever you want to do in lineup construction, I'm okay with using him. He's not my favorite play of the week like he was last week. So had 10 targets. Obviously, I think Moncrief will, coming back, I think that'll shift it down a little bit, but I still think 6 to 7 is a viable option. They still don't have a ton of red zone targets. Moncrief is that, who is back. So he's been very efficient. I think you look at, 80% of the passes thrown his way, he's been over that this year. So he's a solid option. I'm not in love with the matchup, but I think in terms of lineup construction, you can make it work. GPP tight ends, because he's expensive, Rob Gronkowski, if you put him over to a wide receiver, he would be the second most expensive wide receiver. So I think that's, when you're comparing them, Mike Evans is cheaper, T.Y. Hilton's cheaper, you got the Oakland wideouts cheaper. So I think, you got to look at that and go, okay, that's a swerve off of those guys when it comes to kind of comparing that. So 8,100, obviously at the Bills, monster team total. This is not going to be like the shutout team that we saw a couple weeks ago. You're looking for Gronk. This is a guy who's done well against the Bills in the past. In terms of tight ends, they have a 14.1% DVOA against them this year. He's averaged 15.2 FanDuel points per game against Buffalo. You look at last week, volume wasn't there. He only had 4 targets, caught all 4 of them for 100 yards and a touchdown, though. So he doesn't necessarily need the 8 to 10 target game to do anything, as we saw. So obviously we know monster upside. He has an edge over other guys at this position. We know that with him by now. He's going to be a guy who's going to be in this, in this article for the rest of the year. Travis Kelce, this is kind of the one where we go a little bit off the grid. You're looking at that game, and if you're expecting the Colts to play well and expecting them to throw the ball and kind of rack up and maybe even be ahead, you're going to put that logic to use and say, all right, Kansas City in one of these weeks is going to have a decent week throwing the ball in terms of fantasy production. We've seen Jeremy Maclin be in 4 straight good matchups, didn't really come through and produce in any of them. Kelsey's had a total of 6 targets over the last 2 games. That's not good for fantasy production. And that was after 4 straight games with, 7 or more targets. So it's been a little bit disappointing. I think people are off of him. I like the price like 5,700, swerve off of Graham. Really friendly total here for the Chiefs to target. I love Spencer Ware this week, but I think Kelsey's probably my secondary piece if I'm getting exposure to this Chiefs side. So looking to use him. You look at Indy, they're allowing 12.2 FanDuel points per game, 51% DVOA against tight ends this season. So I do like them a lot. You look at Indy, they've allowed 4 tight ends to go over 70 yards receiving this season. So I'll be looking at, Kelce a little bit here in GPPs. You can't trust him in cash, especially after the last few weeks. We got a decent projection for him on the site. Obviously, the cafe value is decent because he's 5,700. We don't have a lot of those mid-range Zach Miller, Kyle Rudolph type plays this week or Delaney Walkers. So it's a little bit limited. Obviously, just 10 games, so 5 teams are on bye this week. So the main slate is a little bit dwindled down. But these are basically the 4 that I'm looking at. If you want to check out the article, article, head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com and you can check out our other great tools and content.